Awesome. So we met in the elevator earlier this today, and it was great meeting you. It was a great icebreaker to this podcast. You were following the Under 19 World Cup. Is that something you do to just scout for upcoming players that are in the system?
Well, to be fair, we've got two players in that team, Islamabad United. So Shamal Hussain and Ubaid Shah are guys that we've been watching. So, and prior to the draft, we were watching everybody. During the Asia Cup under 19s, in case some players jumped out and we thought we want to keep an eye on them, or down the draft order, we might have come across a player that we might not have known too much about. So always looking, eh?
I mean, the whole pick of Ubaid Shah was people were kind of astounded because now we have all three Shahs in the Islamabad team. So was that intentional, or did you spot Ubaid earlier on and this was just a pick that you wanted to get?
It's actually an interesting one. Like Hanan Shah was our number one pick in the emerging players, so we knew that's what we wanted. We liked Ubaid because he's got a different action, quite a slingy action. He actually hits the bat quite hard, but we never thought it would come around again and we would be able to get him later on. We thought that we knew that Zishan would have gone early on because obviously he's got a point of difference. But we thought, we've got to make a decision between Hanan or Ubaid. And then it came around to the next round and we were like, well, why wouldn't we? And then there was a lot of talk of, oh, no, we don't want to. It's not fair on the seam. And it's like, well, it's a cricketing decision. This guy can bowl. And whether he's uncle, cousin, brother, neighbor, it doesn't really matter. Like, he's the best pick for us. And, if we're going to play an emerging bowler, they can potentially be interchangeable and they're quite different. So it was a cricket decision. But no, I'd never thought it would have been possible, to be honest. And then it kind of just appeared. So we grabbed it.
How much has Ubaid impressed you in this Under 19 World Cup?
Well, it's probably not just the numbers. It's actually the way he's gone about it. So he's, it hasn't all gone his way. Like a couple of times, he's had the odd catch dropped off him. He's got hit for the odd boundary where he's, someone's got on top of him. For me, it's the way he's fought back and that real desire to make a difference. He went off injured or cramped the other day. Looked like, his tournament could have been over. And then that willingness to want to fight back and turn a game on its head to progress. That's the characteristics that I like as a coach.
His fifer against Bangladesh was just amazing. The way he brought back Pakistan from a point of like they were almost out of the game and he just brought them back. Like that's the sort of mentality and the fighter mentality that Islamabad United need in their youngsters. So how do you think that will translate over when he comes back into the camp?
Well, I think it's really important when you've got a young player that you don't try and stifle that. Yeah. Like often when you get new players into a national side or a franchise team, often your older players almost want to suppress that. And I think a big part of my role is making sure that we don't. That we actually want players coming in, whether they're experienced, whether they're young, whether they're first time in the PSL, whether they're older and they're coming in to do a job. I want everybody to feel like they can be themselves. And, the likes of, Shamal Hussain, he's never been in the PSL. He might be overawed by people, but I want him to come in. He's got a good sense of humour. I want him to be himself. And that's the same for everybody.
I feel like you have a sort of an uphill task here, and your repertoire and your resume proves that you've done this before with the New Zealand side, where they were 8, 8, and 9, I believe, when you took over, and you took them straight to the finals. And Islamabad United had won 2 of the first 3 PSLs, and they haven't seen the finals in a very long time. So that's an uphill task on your part. How do you think you're going to tackle that challenge? I mean, you've been here before, but it's sort of different circumstances, especially when you only have a 5-week window to turn it around.
Yeah, I mean, I get excited by that in terms of, same with when I coached Otago. Like, we hadn't made a semi-final in 12 years, let alone won a title for 20. So you've got to come in with that intention of, hey, how are you going to turn this around? Otherwise, you give the job to somebody else. If I think I'm going to turn up and things are just going to be the same for a year, and then after a year I'll get stuck into my job, that's just not the way it works. So, for me, it is personnel in some respects, but it's also the style of play, and it's also the belief that the players need to show. So we've got a highly skilled team, And really what happened last year is kind of irrelevant. We can talk about, we haven't made the playoffs, or when we haven't played that well or whatever. That's useless now.
Mm-hmm.
It's about firstly making the playoffs and getting ourselves in a good, strong position. And then it's a matter of when we get in that position, making sure that we're better than we were at the start of the tournament. And then we give ourselves a really good chance.
You mentioned coaching Otago, and I wanted to get into your coaching journey. The typical trajectory of a coach is usually you play cricket, and then you retire from cricket, and then you sort of get into coaching. But you sort of had the opposite trajectory. You started coaching at the age of 22. So talk a bit about how you got into coaching at such an early age.
Yeah, look, I didn't have an intention of being a coach at that age. I went to England as a player. I was an opening batter who bowled a little bit. And I had 2 or 3 really good years in England. I had 1 year where I got 10 hundreds, came back, and I was flying. And then I basically had a pretty serious back injury, which was not getting better. And it was something that I'd come back from England, I made some money, I bought a house, and then I had the chance of playing for Otago, where you were getting paid very little for a long time.
That.
Yeah, so it was like I could either do that, and then I was lucky enough to get offered the director of cricket job when I was 21. And I was, I think I was 20 years younger than the other people, the other 5 in the country. So it was a great opportunity, one that I was not ready for. Like I wasn't, I'd coached as a player coach. I hadn't really coached, separately, but I loved it.
What was the thought process in the organization when they came to a 21-year-old and be like, how about you become the director of cricket? Like, what is that process like? And what made you say yes?
Yeah, so every time I came back from England, I had 6 months where I basically worked as a staff coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I had worked for 3 years for Otago as a coach, and I'd coached, under 19s, under 17s, etc. And I did well. I'd gained a big reputation in terms of, building a good team culture. The players enjoyed the fact that they were improving, and I guess I was close enough to playing at that point that I was relevant. Like I wasn't trying to teach them to play like me. I was just trying to pass on my experience to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think players enjoy that more than a player who's gone through the whole career, they've retired, and now they're going to tell the next group of players how they used to play.
Yeah.
That's one thing that players hate because it's their career. So I guess I was lucky enough to be around where they saw that I was actually there for them.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there to tell them about, all my runs I scored or wickets I took. It was, hey, how can I help you how can I make you better?
Yeah. That's something we experience in boxing cricket, where a lot of the players who start coaching, the players who they coach complain that they haven't really hung in their boots yet. So they're still in the superstar mentality. So with you not having that baggage, I'm guessing that helped for you in your coaching career.
Yeah, and because I was a decent player, but not far from a great player, I had to find different ways to do things. So, and I guess cricket is about problem solving. So if you can try and give players options of things that they could try to help their game, rather than give them an answer, and the answer often is, I used to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, as I said, that's got a really small window of success. So spend a lot of time on getting to know the player, trying to work out what they've done before, how I could offer some suggestions, and then ultimately they find the solution. And that's kind of the way I like to coach.
Did you ever fear sense any pushback from players because you haven't played much international cricket? Were they ever like, oh, how are you speaking about that because you haven't faced those pressures or those circumstances?
Yeah, I guess I was initially, you get a little bit fearful of that because you're thinking every time you go to a new environment, whether it's initially with Otago, then I go to New Zealand, then go to RCB with big names, you come here. So every time you go somewhere new, you're like, maybe I can't offer anything to these guys. And ultimately it's the player's choice, and they make a decision really quickly. Can this guy add value? If he can add value to my career, then he's useful. If he's not, then I'll get rid of him. So ultimately, you're judged by what you can offer the players, and players aren't stupid. And whether it's a AB de Villiers or a whatever, they will work out really quickly, is he coming in to try and tell me how to bat, or is he coming in to try and help me find my form or identify something or ask me a question that might unlock what I've forgotten. And if he does that rather than come in and tell me how I should pick the bat up or whatever, then he's useful.
Yeah. No, that's a great point you mentioned. And you mentioned RCB as well, and you just mentioned AB de Villiers. And RCB has the greatest modern day cricket player of all time in Virat Kohli, and AB de Villiers also had that mantle for a very long time. When players like that come, I guess what you're saying is you're not telling them, like you said, not to hold the bat, but what kind of mental barrier are they going through that you're helping them overcome?
Well, I think firstly, like until you get to know that player and know the pathway they've gone, you can't help them. So if you go in straight away and you watch them in a net session and you identify something and you suggest a change, that's really poor because they might be well aware of that.
Yeah.
And they might have gone through 5 or 6 different coaches that have tried to do things. So until you can identify and ask them questions, is there anything you want me to keep an eye on? Is there how do you feel your weight transfers into the ball at the moment? And if they go, no, it's feeling great, it's like perfect. If they go, hey, I'm not quite feel like I'm getting in great position, can you keep an eye on this? Then you can start to add value.
Now, even if they say that they're feeling great about a certain aspect that you may see is lacking, would you then still tell them that, or would you be like, you do your thing, and if you feel like you're comfortable, then that's it?
I think until you get to know that player, and some players like lots of feedback. Some players like to be left alone during the net and then talk afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Some players, would rather do it in a relaxed environment. Some players just want you to tell them straight away, what have they seen? So you need to have those conversations before you attend trainings and you go, how do you like to receive feedback?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of a game, after somebody's just got out, there are very few players that all of a sudden want you to come up and start talking to them.
Yeah.
So you got to pick and choose your moments of when you might provide some feedback, but that's your responsibility. You can't ignore things either.
Yeah.
Coaching has to do a lot with man management, managing egos, managing the players itself. How much research do you do? Like you mentioned, you want to know where the player is coming from. How much research have you been doing, or do you do on a regular of the players you're about to coach to understand really where they are coming from?
Yeah, probably the research I'll do is just more talking with the player because, I read things and I look at how players have progressed and I know a bit about their background and things like that, but it's probably more about how they interpret that that's important. So, who do they work with and who do you like working with? Who have you had the most success with? Is there anything in particular that you're working on at the moment? Is there anything that's not going that well? How do you like to take feedback? Do you want it straight away? So you're kind of gathering that. And as you build a genuine relationship, because it can't be, I think if a player feels like they're a commodity and all you're doing is talking to them to build this relationship so that they score runs, that's pretty fake. Like I'm more about like genuinely having a connection with somebody and the only way you do that is also by sharing a little bit yourself.
Yeah, you have to put yourself out there.
You do. You have to be a little bit vulnerable as well. If you're asking somebody to be vulnerable and tell them about where they're struggling, you can't pretend that you've got it all together as well and you've got an answer for everything.
Yeah. I'm always curious about the relationships, like you said, between the player and the coach, especially in these T20 leagues era, where some of the leagues are even 3.5, 4 weeks, and you don't really get to spend that much time with the players. How do you find yourself opening up to someone brand new? And how do you find people opening up to you when you're trying to help them out?
I think we're lucky enough, I guess, with the draft in this instance where, because it happened before Christmas, you've got a chance to make contact with people beforehand and talk to them and give them some clarity around what you see their role is. So when they turn up at the camp, a week before or sometimes 2 days before, it's not the first time you've talked about the expectations you have and what you want to see from them.
Mm-hmm.
So you've kind of started that process. And then during that time, there are some players that I've spoken to a few times. There are some that I haven't because they're off playing in different tournaments or whatever. But it's, players, when they go between different tournaments, all they want is clarity. What do you expect of me? How do you judge me? And what's my role within the team, both on the field and off the field? And then you start to work out those players that want more responsibility because they love it, and those that just want to come and play.
Yeah.
And both of those are fine as long as you can work it out early.
Yeah. You've been coaching since 1998, and ever since that time, technology and data have sort of overtaken cricket. At what point did you sort of have that eureka moment where, okay, there's a lot of data, we can manipulate it, it's very helpful, and it's actually showing impactful results? Was there a moment in your career, do you remember a timeline where that happened?
Yeah, I was pretty lucky really early on because I was actually part of developing a software company for cricket coaching. So it was called Silicon Coach at the time, and it went through different transformations. So I was kind of part of that journey even before 1998. So I was hopeful that data would start to play more of a role because that was kind of my background. Because when you're talking with players, and not every player, but some players, you've got to deal in facts. Because if you start throwing, well, I won't say accusations, but throwing things out about areas where they need to grow, a lot of them will look at you like, really? Like, and it's like, well, hang on, here's some. What do you see in this information? So once you start to deal in facts, and probably even when I first started coaching, when I was 20, 21 or whatever, that was one of the easy things to grow, is to measure KPIs, basic KPIs, and therefore you could show progress. So whether it be a under 14 girls team or an under 17 boys, everyone wants to see that they're improving, or they're not. So when you start to put in basic KPIs and at the end of the day you put it up on the board and you show people, you could see the way they get motivated around that, and then that ultimately leads to better performance. So whether I probably stumbled upon that, and then as you said, data becomes more useful, and I guess it's a bit more detailed than just your generic stuff. You can use it differently. But yeah, I like facts. It's
For
way
sure,
easier.
yeah. Islamabad United here have a hashtag Dimag Se approach where they're quite data driven.
Mm.
Is it ever possible to be too much in the data? I mean, I think one of the greatest captains was MS Dhoni, and he mentioned that he used to follow his instinct a lot of time, his gut feeling. So, do you think there is still that aspect where you advise Shadab to sometimes go with what he's feeling versus what the data is saying?
Oh, absolutely. I think that data is all about context, and unless you're out in the middle, you need to be able to read the situation. You might have a particular matchup with a certain player, but once you get out there, you actually find out that the ball's, so it might be against a left arm spinner, and then straight away after the first over, Shadab sees that the ball's just nibbling a little bit off the surface. He's got to be able to have enough cricket knowledge to go, hang on, Ahmad, we're going to bring in one of our other seamers and he's going to bowl. Like, I'm not going to be sitting there at the sideline waving and showing him a piece of paper. Like, he's got to be able to, he's a smart enough man to be able to read the situation, and I'll support that 100%. The last thing you want is your coach, trying to captain from the sideline. That's the best way to sort of undermine a team. So I love data, and there's a time and a place for it, but you also need context.
Right now in Pakistan cricket, if you zoom out a little bit, there's a lot of talk about strike rates, especially from the top 3, top 4 who are coming into bat. As a data man, what do you think about that whole debate? Is how important is strike rate? Should there be an anchor man leading in a T20 franchise or a T20 team, etc.?
Well, it depends what the rest of your talent is. For me, it's about your job is to maximize talent. So I don't think you can look at any squad and say you have to play this way. Like, we're lucky enough with a draft, we can decide the way we want to play, and then we can pick players to suit that. But if at the end of it you don't have, you've only got power players and you've got not many players that face a lot of balls, then there is potentially a role for somebody to bat a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do that at the extent of applying pressure to everybody else.
Yeah.
So, for me, it's about, you've actually got to be able to do both. You've got to be able to, your best players are those that obviously can have a higher strike rate and higher volume.
Yeah.
Those are obviously your best. So it's more about when it's your day, you've got to win the game.
Yeah.
So rather than if you go out straight away thinking I'm going to be the anchor, and you suck up a heap of balls and you end up 30 below par, that's no good to anybody.
Yeah.
So, that's where I guess it comes back to understanding what is required to win that game.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yep. How proud are you on your achievements for New Zealand cricket as their coach? Because you were the longest serving coach for them. When you, like you mentioned it earlier, that when you took over, they were like 8, 9 in ranking, and when you left, one of the greatest achievements you had was getting New Zealand to the World Cup final. Talk a bit about the initial challenges and then the feeling of getting to the World Cup final with that crazy semifinal win.
Yeah, I mean, taking over New Zealand was I guess it was a dream of mine in terms of I was really passionate about New Zealand cricket, and I was really hurt because we weren't anywhere near maximising the talent that we had. And New Zealand cricket was a bit of a joke with the public and the way we were, I guess, judged. And I hated that. Just as a fan, when I was, you talk to someone about New Zealand, what do you do for a job? I'm a cricket coach. Oh, those black caps are rubbish. I hated that.
That's tough.
It was like, I wanted to go and when I took on that job, it was like, I actually needed to try and change the whole psyche from New Zealand cricket, not by myself, but be part of it. And we had a really tough start, which was not unexpected because we weren't very good. And it didn't take long to realise that we needed to make a few changes. And I guess at that time, it was like I could do the same as everybody else because they're telling me you should do it this way, or I should do it the way that I think it should be done. And there was a bit of a eureka moment there, I guess, where it was like, well, in 12 months' time, I'll probably get the sack anyway if we keep playing poorly. And if I toe the party line and do the right thing, I might get 18 months out of it, but it's actually not going to be a lot of fun anyway. And when I leave, we'll probably revert back to the same thing we were. So I may as well try and do it my way. And that was when I decided, we've actually got to start a scratch here and try and identify players that are really passionate about playing for New Zealand, that have those fighting characteristics that New Zealand people love. Like we're a rugby nation.
Yeah.
And the reason why a lot of people like the All Blacks is whatever is because they fight and they scrap and they never give in. And those qualities that all of our sporting teams are renowned for. So for me, it was about how do we get that back? How do we get that respect back from the public? And probably internally, how do we change our expectations around if you want to be part of this team, this is what you do. And therefore, I made some changes. I changed the captain, which was, really unpopular.
We heard about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think most people did. And there was a view that, I changed it because I was going to bring my mate, Brendan McCullum, in or whatever, which was just nonsense. It was like, as I said, we weren't going particularly well. The changing room, there was clearly some issues that were unfolding. And it was like, well, for this team to move forward, I think we need to make a change here. And regardless of how it was done, it was always going to be carnage. And it was. And not for the right reasons, just because, as you said, I hadn't played for New Zealand before. Who's this guy to come in and make change? And then probably 90 to 95% of those people that were giving me a hard time 6 months later were coming up and saying what a great decision that was.
What was it about Brendan that sort of stood out to you that you thought that he would be a great captain?
Well, I've known Brendan for a long time, and to be fair, I only thought he was ready probably then. If it was 12 months earlier, he was still going through a transition in his own life as well in terms of what his motivation was, what was important to him, how he thought the team should run. And I think it was only at that time where he'd, I guess, matured and probably understood himself enough to go, this is something that I really want to do. And when I spoke to him and said, are you interested in doing this job? Initially, he was like, let me have a think about it. And it didn't take him long to go, yeah, I'll do that. But not initially. Initially, it was like, I'm not so sure. But I was like, I actually think you're the right guy for this team now.
How do you rate Brendan the batsman versus Brendan the coach?
Brendan's gone through a massive transition in coaching as well.
Yeah, 100%.
I think if you think about when he first started, coming in, he did Lahore. He did the Heat and whatever. So once again, he went through that transition to find himself as a coach. So I think now he's got to that point where he's comfortable in his own skin as a coach. And that is quite different as a player. I think as a player, the last 5 years of Brendan as a batsman were his best.
Yeah.
Because he started to understand what he was really good at and also accept that there are some things that I'm not that good at, but that's okay. I can still find a way. And a lot of people perceived him as, being reckless or, explosive, but he was far from that. Everything he did was very calculated and based around what he knew he was good at, and also identifying the fact that, hey, my defensive game is not as good as Kane Williamson or Ross Taylor or whatever, but I've got other strengths. And that kind of goes back to your question before about the anchor. You can't have everybody play the same way.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't have 11 Brendan McCullums in our batting lineup, but we definitely couldn't do without one, because then, on his day, he can take the game away from any team. And you have to have those players that sides are fearful of, and he was certainly one of those.
So you're a fan of baseball?
That's
what I want to know.
No, I am a huge fan, to be honest, because the game, I watch England play Test cricket all the time.
Yeah.
Because, what's going to happen next? And, I think he identified, he talked about it, a bit of a responsibility, I guess, to the game, because the game had stagnated and England certainly weren't maximising the talent they had. And they're exciting. And when they get it right, they can sort of blow any team away. So, it's not foolproof, but I tell you what, it gives them the best chance.
Yeah.
And that's actually pretty skillful coaching.
Talked about how being impactful now in white ball cricket is so much more important than being an anchor. McCullum's inning of 50 against South Africa in the World Cup semi-final was one of the greatest impactful innings. It sort of set the tone for the other guys to come in and play their game. How was that moment for you, being at Eden Park, sold out crowd, that last over, Stain versus Grant Elliott, and Superman, as Ian Smith called it? Can you describe that feeling for us, just being in the stands there?
Well, I still get goosebumps now, to be honest, because it was probably 3 years of work. That team coming together, going from where they were to that semi-final moment, where I think New Zealand had made 6 semi-finals before that and never made a final. So, that innings, it was actually really funny. I remember, we only had like a 10-minute break, I think, because there'd been rain. And we'd come in and I think we were chasing close to 300, 241 overs or something like that. And I remember Craig McMillan, the batting coach, who's a great mate of mine and a great mate of Baz's. He walked over to Baz and started talking to him about what his batting plan was going to be. And Baz was like, "Mate, I've got this. I've got this." And it was like, "Mate, Macca, just leave him to it. He's got 5 minutes here. He's in the zone." And we needed something special because the rest of our batting lineup, or that middle order, were really good at setting the game up. And Baz's innings basically allowed them, as you said, to play normally. When you go out and you're chasing over 7.5, and then by the time he gets out, you're chasing 5 and over or close to it, the game's changed.
Yeah.
So, and just the way he did the same against Mitchell Starc in the game where we were chasing 130 or whatever. He just came out and just took him on. And he got smashed in the arm, and pretty much we thought he broke his arm, but it didn't stop him. And it just gave that belief to the rest of the group of, hey, if our captain's willing to take the game on, you got to practice what we preach here, guys. And that has allowed the rest of us to just bat normally. And then Grant came in and did what he did. But Corey Anderson came out, sort of run a ball 50.
Vittori had a good cameo.
Vittori, that lovely little late cut that he did, give him a big hug for every time I see him. And there were two really smart cricketing people out there at the end. Those were two guys who you want to have out there. They know, obviously they ran the bye, which was really smart. often if you're in such a pressure situation and you haven't got that experience, you would be flustered, but they were really clear in their thinking. Grant knew that we only needed 4. So we were, we were sitting in the box up the top. We were sort of thinking Stain was going to bang one in and he was going to ramp it, and really short boundaries at Eden Park. So we were thinking the draw would have been great. And then it actually been practicing that shot against the bowling machine that day, like a bucket of balls, just hitting a length and just banging it over there. And just the sound of the bat in that indoor stadium, reverberates. Him and Martin Gupta were actually doing the same thing. And then, when he hit it, it was always 6. And we couldn't run down the stairs fast enough just to get it back on the field. And because everyone's superstitious, right? So by the time you get the last wee, no one's moving. So we're in the coach's box, on the walkie-talkie and whatever. And then it's like, well, hang on, we just need to stay here.
Yeah.
And then, we just ran down and it was a pretty special time. And then doing a lap of honour, I guess, just thanking the New Zealand public because they'd supported us pretty hard for the last 6 weeks. So it was pretty special.
It's so funny that you mentioned the tie because literally 4 years later, that's what sort of brought down the house with that tie in the final. I want to know 2015 final and 2019 final, which one hurts most as a New Zealand cricket fan?
Well, 2015 final, we were actually in it, to be fair, after 35 overs with the bat. And everyone talks about Brendan getting out early, but Ross and Grant had actually got us to the second drinks break. I think we're 3 for 150. So we were set up quite nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And then we fell over sort of to Faulkner. And then we didn't really have enough, and then we got a wicket, and then we had the ball bounced on the stumps and the bails didn't come off. So we were kind of like, so we hung in there, but we weren't really in it. And this is really hard for a New Zealander to say, but Australia on that day with the ball were outstanding. Those first 20 overs were as good as it gets. Like, they didn't give any freebies. And like I said, it's hard to say, but they were very good. 2019, like I'd finished about 9 months before then. So, and the team hadn't changed a huge amount. So it was like pretty much the same team. And I was actually on the broadcast. I was doing TV for it.
No.
And I wasn't scheduled for the last 5 overs. And it was like, thank goodness I can go and sit in the green room and just watch and enjoy. Watch, hopefully, New Zealand win a final. And then the director or whatever came in and said, nah, we need you on the broadcast. So I called in, and it was tough. It was really tough to watch because, as we know, there were so many different turning points. The overthrows, the Bolt standing on the. There were so many things that it almost wasn't meant to be, and that was really hard to take. And I remember writing an article afterwards, like, the boundary count was always written for T20 tournaments. Like, that was because I remember sitting in an ICC meeting where it was written. It was never ever intentioned for a 50 over competition.
Yeah.
So therefore, for me, it should have been a tie. I mean, there are many tournaments around the world where people share a trophy.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the time where it should have. I mean, a super over and a 50 over competition, I'm not so sure, let alone do one and then have a boundary count. And I'm still a little bit bitter about that.
I'm just thinking about how you commentated through those 5 overs because, I would not want to be in your shoes. And we talk for a living. So
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to be there. I mean, it sort of like, at least for Ian Smith's sake, it sort of made him stratospheric. He was already a legend before that, but I still hear the barrister margins and agony. Man, it was tough for Smitty there in the comms.
Well, he's obviously a genius as a broadcaster. I mean, I was the comments man, wasn't I? The colour in the Star Sports studio, and it was like, I probably was quiet at the wrong time. I was probably supposed, but it was like it hurt. It really did hurt. And of course, the camera pans on you. And you're trying to be professional, but you're also it hurts.
Yeah. How do you keep a brave face with that happening?
Oh, you try and be professional, don't you? And then you go find yourself a little quiet space later on. And but it was, I mean, in England, they're great winners, aren't they? Like, they won by the barest of margins.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever heard any of them talk about how lucky they were.
Yeah.
They've taken it and run with it, and fair enough. But I don't think a New Zealand team would have been quite like that. I think we would have been a little bit more respectful of our opposition.
I mean, to rub salt in the wounds, Ben Stokes, a Kiwi, was the man of the match. So, how proud are you of your legacy that you've left behind for New Zealand cricket? Because it seems like the seeds that you planted many, many years ago, I mean, New Zealand still turns up in every ICC tournament, playing the top four, getting the playoffs, finals. They just won the World Test Championship in a few years ago. So looking back, how proud of you are of all of your accomplishments and the legacy that you've left behind?
Yeah, look, it's not until you do leave that you look back, because you're just dealing with the next tournament and planning ahead. But I definitely sat back and self-reflected and thought, look, I'm actually comfortable where I've left this team. Really great group of leaders that, have developed, and they're really proud of the Black Caps brand, I guess, the way they play the game. Because it wasn't just the performance, it was also the way they treated the opposition, the way they treated the umpires, the respect, the way people spoke in a respectful manner for people. New Zealanders had sort of turned the corner there. And that was something I was really proud of, that was part of that. And even today, when you hear, players speak, it is all about the team. And that's something that, we spend a lot of time reinforcing. And that's when you look at the players and you go, hey, we need players that actually think of the team first before themselves, because that's the way the game works. If you're more worried about your individual milestones than the team, we're not going to go very well here. So, yeah, I'm pleased that that's continued, that's for sure.
And how do you plan on taking that mindset and applying it to United?
Yeah, pretty similar. But firstly, you can't just cut and paste.
Of course.
It is about getting to know the team. As I said, that's already started. You're getting to know what the players feel has worked really well here, what hasn't, and sort of starting to understand that a bit in my own way. Spending a lot of time with Shadab in terms of, how he likes to operate, and then working out how I can add value. So for me, that combination between the coach and the captain is really important. And the coach has to be the one that's a bit more malleable and can suit the group. So I think we're pretty well advanced in terms of that, in terms of how we want to play. But I'll set the tone pretty early in terms of, it is about the team. What can you do to help the team win this game of cricket?
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's how you'll be judged. It's not a matter of you got 2 wickets or 3 wickets or 5. What was your contribution to winning the game? Because that's ultimately the only thing that matters. And that's the way I like to operate.
Yeah, well, Mike, we wish you the best of luck for this season, and we hope Islamabad gets to the finals. I hope you guys win, and I hope you have an integral role in getting Islamabad to where we want to go. So again, thank you for your time. We've enjoyed this conversation, and best of luck.
Appreciate it. Lots of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.